Our first speaker is Dave Montgomery. Dave Montgomery is recently retired from the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services. During his 39-year career, he specialized in regulation of health professionals and the organization and re-engineering of regulatory systems. His primary service as Executive Director for the Nebraska State Board of Health and as Director of Nebraska's Sunrise Program, through which the athletic training profession secured licensure in Nebraska. His tenure also included 3 years of service as an administrator for the OT and PT boards. He was a co-leader for the project that oversaw the rewriting and codification of the Nebraska Uniform Credentialing Act in 2008 and the multitude of regulations developed from it. A former national president of the Council on Licensure, Enforcement, and Regulation, known as CLEAR, Dave was instrumental in developing CLEAR's executive leadership program for regulators and continues to serve as faculty for that program and the board member training program. He has co-chaired the program committee for the BOC Regulatory Conference since 2009 and has presented at several of the conferences. Dave advises health profession boards and organizations seeking to enhance their governance and operational excellence. Dave Montgomery.
Thank you. Thank you, Kurt, and good morning, everybody. And unless you're from California, congratulations. As after all those years, you finally got your Practice Act. You got your state regulation. You had the party, you celebrated, you woke up the next morning and think, well, now we have to do rules and regs. And the whole thing starts over again. Because the experience that you had in pulling together that successful licensure effort years ago, or months ago as the case may be, is going to stand you in good stead when you start working in your rules and regs. Let me take a quick survey here. How many of you are from states or jurisdictions that have a set of rules already in place? Okay, how many of you are working on a revision of those? Yeah, this is a never-ending story. You will revise those rules and regs until the next time that your statute is revised. Then once your statute is revised, you will revise the rules and regs again. It goes on and on and on. So the perspective that I want to work with you on this morning is one of prevention. As any good clinician, you know that prevention is where good outcomes start. You anticipate problems, you make sure that you're taking steps to avoid them wherever possible. Rules and regs development and promulgation is exactly the same scenario. In order to prevent as many problems as possible in your process, you need to be prepared by understanding who is involved in this process. Who are you going to have to work with? We live in a professional world where we identify within our profession. Most of our contacts are within our profession. We have to get out of that for rules and regs because there are a lot of people who are interested in the rules and regs that are not athletic trainers or PTs or OTs for that matter or MDs who will want to be involved in this process, and you need to be able to understand their point of view. No surprises is your goal. As you go through this process, you're going to be working with people that we'll identify here in a couple of minutes. And at the end of the day, when your set of regulations is done and ready to carry off to the authorities, whoever they may be, you want there to be no surprises in that process. You don't want to be blindsided by anyone coming forward that you haven't already worked with, understood the perspective that they bring to the professional regulatory model. And if you haven't worked out all of your issues, at least you've got your priorities set for how you're going to negotiate with these people, how you're going to come to terms with them in the future. You know what your firm line in the sand is that you will not give up in your regulations and what is negotiable for you. These are the things that you can do by adopting a point of view. Look at the world through the perspective of the people who are your adversaries or your neutral players or even your nominal allies. Because every one of the people that you're involved with in the regulatory development process is going to have something that they want out of the process. The old what's in it for me model. It works here just like everywhere else. The more you know, the more you're prepared to go into this regs process knowing what they want, what they expect out of the process, what they expect as an outcome, and what motivates them. What is the point why are they involved in this process in the first place? What do they want to get out of it? You have an outstanding goal in mind. You or your board want to comply with the law. You want to make sure that you have a set of regs in place that will stand the test of time. It may be, if you're revising your regs especially, that your goal, your point of view, is to solve a problem, something that has come up. We're going to see that with the Utah model a little bit later, where they thought they had a very good set of regs. In fact, they did have a good set of regs, but something came up that hadn't been anticipated, and so they want to go back and work with those a little bit more. Fine. That's your perspective. That's your point of view. Everybody at the table or in the process with you also has that point of view. So let's take a quick survey of the people who are going to be involved in the development process. Remember that regulations writing has two phases, development process and promulgation process. We're going to look at both of them, but primarily right now we want to look at the development phase of rules. There are many players. A big one, obviously, is going to be your licensees, your registrants, the people that you regulate. What is their point of view? What do they want? What do they expect? Remember that, first of all, the average AT in the street wants a set of regs with which he or she can comply easily. They don't want to have to go back and get more training. They don't want to have to pay exorbitant fees, so cost is always an issue. There may be concerns in your constituents about mobility. We're looking now at international mobility within the profession. Other professions have faced this for many years. But the licensee who is going to be governed by these regs is going to be primarily concerned, typically, with ease of compliance and cost issues, and maybe to a lesser degree with mobility issues. So as you're writing your regs and trying to sell them to your licensees, remember to keep these factors in mind. These are what they're going to be looking for and paying the most attention to. Employers, another big constituency that will be at the table when you're developing your regs, or certainly should be. And again, ease of compliance is going to be a major issue there. Employers do not want to have to jump through a whole lot of new hoops. They want to know where the hoops are. They want to know that they are small hoops, that they are not on fire, that they are easily navigable, that, well, and some people jump through fiery hoops, but employers don't like to do that. Cost is also an issue for employers. As the cost of regulation goes up, it gets eaten by everybody in the food chain. And the employers are definitely in the food chain, so they don't want to see their costs of compliance have to rise. There's also another issue, though, that employers will bring to the table, and that is ease of recruitment. What in your regulations will enhance or impede the ability of employers to recruit and bring in the people that they want to hire? Keep that in mind as the employers come and participate in the regulatory process. Your state association will be at the table, and I'm not even going to try to identify the types of issues, that the point of view that state association will bring to the rulemaking process. Every state is going to be different. Hopefully there will be nothing here that surprises you, because you will have been working closely in tandem with your state association as your state law was developed, and now as the rules and regs are put in place, and as you begin to modify and change those rules and regs. The association is always going to be there And you will understand those issues better than any kind of summary we can give here. But just remember, there will always be that point of view coming at you from the State Association that you need to be cognizant of. One thing that we often forget in our rules-making process is that our regulations can have impact on other professions or other professional boards, both within your clinical team and within your state or province. Scope of practice issues. Yes, your scope is identified in your Practice Act, fine. But you also know that the way you develop your regulations is going to have an impact on how that scope is operationalized, how that scope impacts and works with the scopes of the other members of your clinical team and of other professions. Make sure, for example, that you have the proper exemptions in your regulations so that people who are practicing their legitimate profession under their own legitimate state or provincial regulation are exempted appropriately from the requirements of your statute and your rules. That will avoid a tremendous amount of conflict down the line as those rules go through promulgation. Also, look for overlaps. Places where you may be requiring something in your regulations that another profession is requiring, but in a slightly different form or fashion. Even though you're regulating different professions, there's still great value in consistency. As you go through the adjudication process later on, especially in the disciplinary area and your discipline rules, if you have consistent standards and consistent language in your discipline rules with other professions in your state, it's going to benefit you in the long run when you may have a disciplinary action challenged, for example, and you can point to the fact that our standards here and our penalties are exactly the same as the PTs and the osteopaths and the dental hygienists have in our state. That kind of consistency takes you away from the arbitrary and capricious label that sometimes can torpedo a case when it goes into appeals. Advocacy groups may or may not be present. Advocacy groups are people who want something special. You may have people in your state that want something special, and you may not. Where you get advocacy groups involved in the rulemaking process many times is over issues of legal residency status and language proficiency. These types of issues will come up as you're looking at your examination standards, as you're looking at whether or not you have a language proficiency requirement, whether you have a legal residency requirement. How many of you are from states that do have an overarching legal residency requirement for professional licensure? You know, there are a few out there right now that have already solved that problem. For the most part, it's a board-to-board thing. So special advocacy groups simply have to be understood as pressing for their issue. They're really not looking out for the universal good. They're primarily there to satisfy their issue. The general public will be involved in your rulemaking process primarily in response to newspaper headlines, current events, high-profile issues. If an AT in your state has killed anyone lately, they may be there. They want to make sure that you have disciplinary processes in place. If you've had high-profile athletic events, the death of a high school player from dehydration or things like this, this is what gets the public, the true public, energized. They want to come out and make sure that you as a regulator are doing something about those kinds of issues, that something is in place to deal with them. The public, as opposed to the other participants in your process, will seldom have an answer for you. Most of the other constituency groups that we've seen so far are going to have their own answers. They want you to adopt their point of view, their solution, their language, whatever. The public simply wants you to do something, to solve the problem, to be shown to be activist. Some of you are in agencies where you're not a standalone board. You're not your own free agent. So there has to be another level in your rules development process of some kind of an overarching agency. In Nebraska, our boards were all part of the Nebraska Department of Health. And any regulations that came out of our boards had to be approved by the State Board of Health and by the Nebraska Department of Health as a separate agency before they ever went any further in the process. About half the states are in that kind of situations. Illinois, Alaska, Massachusetts, you know if you are. You know if you have an autonomous freestanding board or not. Just remember that there could be overarching policies within those organizations that may have to take precedent over what your board would prefer to see. Again, the hobgoblin of consistency arises. Many agencies are going to require that all regulations have some sort of standard language that has to be incorporated. Turn the world around. Look at it from the perspective of these people that you're going to be dealing with and negotiating with as you develop your rules. Then when you're done, you have a set of rules that's ready to be shipped off to the great unknown, you have to deal with the promulgation process. The promulgation process is nowhere near as standardized as the regs development process. Every state, every jurisdiction, every province is going to have its own process for promulgating and approving regulations. In some states, it's as simple as having a judge-advocate convene a public hearing and write a report and file it with the clerk of the legislature, and it's done. In other states, it can take months, if not years, to wind its way through the various approval bodies that can stand in the way of a successful regulation. The same tactic will work here, though. Know what their perspective is. Know what they want. Know what they expect from you. Be prepared and avoid surprises. So let's look at some of the players. No state is going to have all of these players in the promulgation process, but at some point you're going to have to deal with most of these somewhere down the line. Starts with your in-house attorney, whether that is your own legal staff who you hire and control, whether it is an attorney general or a deputy attorney general who is assigned to you, to your board from the attorney general's office or from a larger agency counsel pool. Regardless, you're almost always going to have a single attorney or a team of attorneys that will be working with you to pull together the rules and regs. These are your bestest friends. These are your little buddies. You want to treat these people very nicely because they are your bridge to the legal community and the outside world. They know your problems. They know your secrets. They usually don't tell. They're pretty reliable about that. But their goal is to help you, to be your advocate and get your regs passed with the minimal amount of fuss and bother. So take these people into your confidence, use them, treat them as your biggest ally. They truly can be. If you're in an overarching agency, you will somehow have to go through the agency head or whatever process that agency head is established. Once again, their goal primarily is going to be consistency. They want to make sure that the regulations that come out of this department all meet the standards, the test for whatever the standards of regulation are with that department. But there is another big obstacle that can occur with you at an agency head level if you have to deal with that. And that is that remember who the agency head is appointed by. Some of you will have independent commissions, but the vast majority of people who are working with an agency are going to be working with a gubernatorial appointee. A gubernatorial appointee's job is ostensibly to run the organization. Their real marching orders, as I think everyone in the room understands, is to keep problems off the governor's desk and to front for the governor when and if problems or issues do occur. So an agency head who is in the rules promulgation loop is going to be looking out for things that conflict with the agenda of the party in power or the governor in power. And this may be your biggest obstacle, in all honesty, to overcome. You may never get it past an agency head who is, if they have a problem with your regs, is determined to stop it, it can stop it. I have seen that happen here in Nebraska twice, where an agency head has held up the promulgation of professional regulations for years because of the governor's agenda that simply would not allow them to go forward, even to public hearing. So be aware of this if you fall into that situation. The Attorney General, one way or the other, is almost always in the loop. If not the Attorney General, then a Judge-Advocate. One of those two is going to be looking primarily at whether or not you have the statutory authority to promulgate the regs that you are bringing over. Sometimes it goes so far as to have a provision that every section of your regs must cite the appropriate statutory authority whereupon that section of the regs is based, so that they can go back and check it and make sure that that is actually what the language of the law says. This is not a bad thing, but it can be a very time-consuming thing. And this, again, is where your in-house staff attorney or legal counsel can be of tremendous help to you. If you work through an attorney general's office, another thing they're going to be looking for is whether they have appropriate authority and grounds to prosecute. Because they will be the prosecuting attorney if and when you bring disciplinary cases against licensees. So they're going to want especially to make sure that that discipline section is iron tight, that you have given them all of the procedural tools, definitions that they need to carry forward a successful prosecution. How many of you have a legislative rules committee that you have to go through? Let us pray. Because you have probably the toughest battle that anyone in a promulgation process has. Legislative rules committees are notorious for it being very easy for them to say no. It looks good. They're protecting the public from overregulation. They're turning down things that will cost people more money. The committees can be helpful to you in ensuring that you are carrying out statutory intent. These are the ladies and gentlemen who wrote the bill. They know what they wanted in that legislation. They think they know it better than you do, even though you probably know it better than they do. They will help you understand how that regulation ties in with the intent of their original statute. They also do not want to hear a lot of problems. The legislature likes consensus. Legislative committees like consensus. You learned that when you took your licensure bill before the legislatures. And they did not want to hear all of the arguments that you had with other professions and other groups. All they wanted to see was people happily smiling, holding hands, and saying, yes, we all agree. That's what your Legislative Rules Committee wants to see as well. Happy agreement and consensus. You probably at some point have to go through the governor's office to have regulations approved. And this, again, this is a political place. This is the place where your technical and professional issues matter much less than the extent to which you have mollified or satisfied all parties in the regulatory process, and which you can say, we have worked out all of our agreements, just sign and we won't make any more problems for you. Know your key players. Know who these people are that you're going to be across the table from or in the same room from or at the public hearing with. Know what their point of view is, know what they're looking for, what they expect. Use that understanding of their point of view to prevent the roadblocks and the confrontations and the misunderstandings that can get in the way of any regulatory process, rules, regulations, or statutes. Thank you very much.